Welcome to the We Have More Than We Know podcast with your host, Michael Ray.
Hello and good evening. Welcome to the podcast. For this evening's event, sorry for starting a little bit late, but just wanted to go over a few things. And essentially this episode is going to be covering state secrets and the privileges that are provided therein. So for starters, what I want to do is to get us ramped up. I know it's starting off the clip's not the most intriguing thing, but I kind of want to get people an idea of where we're going to be focusing this episode on. So for this first clip, what I'd like people to see is essentially it's going to be an interview that's going over the Bush administration's policies through 9/11. And I'm going to go ahead and roll that to start off.
The actions taken by the George W. Bush administration in the aftermath of the September 11th, 2001 terrorist attacks were, according to author Mary Graham, a recalibration of the role of secrecy in open government. A president who championed limited government approved the secret detention of foreign terror suspects and the eavesdropping on phone calls of American citizens.
When his detention policies and interrogation policies and surveillance policies began to be revealed, this was then a few years later, I thought there must be some ground rules. There must be a law that tells us what a president can do behind closed doors in an emergency. But it turned out there really were no laws. One thing about our system of governance that makes secrecy so interesting is that there's really no way that to stop a president from doing something illegal, unethical, or just plain foolish behind closed doors.
In her new book, President's Secrets, The Use and Abuse of Hidden Power, Graham finds modern presidential secrecy is paramount in questions of national security, from the Cold War to the War on Terror. The Bush administration came in with a firm commitment that they could move things quickly through government, and then they have the crisis of 9/11. And this substantially changed the way that they used information and used secrecy.
It's only in the hard times when the president has to face these values, the conflict between values that we cherish, that you see a president's true character. So I think that these are the times when we need to pay attention to what decisions the president makes about openness and secrecy.
When President Barack Obama took over, he declassified memos used to justify harsh interrogations of post-9/11 terror suspects, and he created a national declassification center for older government documents. But WikiLeaks and self-described whistleblower Edward Snowden prevented the Obama administration from concealing details about electronic surveillance, drone strikes, and offensive cyber weapons. The actions taken by the George W. Bush administration in the aftermath.
All right. So the focus of that clip is essentially covering a few different things, but WikiLeaks, Edward Snowden, and essentially what happened after 9/11. The reason why that's so important and so imperative for where we're going to be going this evening is because a lot of our constitutional rights have been thwarted throughout the various administrations in the past. For example, Obama, Bush, even going all the way back to Clinton. As far as this past election is concerned, though, if election infrastructure, for example, I want to pull up a page really fast. Give me a moment here. Let's go ahead and see if that's working good. And so if we take a look at the statement that was made on January 6th, 2017. So this is after Trump gets into office. He's already won or not into office rather, before he gets into office. But just before that happens, just before that takes place, you have the Obama administration, Department of Homeland Security, Secretary of State Jay Johnson. And what he does is after seeing that Trump was going to be coming in, he designates election infrastructure as critical infrastructure. And so the reason why that matters is because what that does is it puts the national election and the lack of oversight for it directly into the State Department under their control, under their purview. And the reason that becomes a conflict of interest is because with state secrets, those are exclusive under the executive branch. So as far as the clip that I'm about to play now, it's going to be from the Pete Santilli show. And it's essentially Patrick Byrne and Pete Santilli going over this past election. I'll go ahead and let that roll.
To reverse this, he didn't have to do anything nearly that dramatic, but he had extraordinary powers under that. And actually, Obama signed something in 2015 that was sort of the foundation of this. So he had extraordinary power. He could have fixed everything, frankly, if he could have fixed everything. He could have taken some extraordinary measures. We didn't think he had to. We thought he had to just take some tiny, tiny little measures, and it would have solved everything. But
I say more.
And
I say more so. Of course, we can be critical of the chief executive. Woulda, coulda, shoulda. He had a lot of authority, but I say shame on those that were surrounding him and not advising him properly. He should have had a whole team of people that were on the payroll saying, Mr. President, you have the following 5 options. You could launch ICBMs at this thing in the following, not ICBMs, but the equivalent of it. This is what we can do right here now because this election was interfered with by foreign adversaries. And
correct.
They didn't do
on
that.
This December 18th meeting of some renown where Sidney and Mike and another lawyer I'll call Alyssa ended up in the Oval Office, Sidney explained all that to President Trump and pulled out paperwork that showed him, and it sure appeared that he had not been informed of, not only did it appear he had not been informed of the truth about the law and his real powers and the options in front of him, but when his current set of lawyers came in to that room, God, they were miserable. They spent the entire evening telling him, trying to talk him out, denying. They clearly had not, I wouldn't say they gave their client good service. They had not informed him of these powers he had. They had not advised him on any of a number of possible remedies. I thought that it was a 3-foot putt. I thought that what he needed to do, what he should do, is send in a federal force sign that finding, and the evidence was overwhelming. His own FBI and CISA had declared on the day of the election there's foreign entanglement in this through advanced persistent actor attacks out of Iran. He could have just done that. He signed that piece of paper and then sent a federal force in to open ballot boxes in 6 counties. You know, these guys, when they sold us all these machines, always say there's always a paper ballot backup. There's always a paper ballot backup. It's a fail-safe. No one. Well, it was time to hold them to their word, and he should have sent a federal force in to 6 counties. They could have opened the boxes, recounted the ballots, and in 2 days, we would have had our answer. To reverse this, he didn't have to do anything.
So, sounds simple, right? Sounds simple that, just send in the army, send in the military, just, take it back. Now, it probably could have been done that way, but you got to remember precedents and prior precedents. So if you think back to the Trump administration, what are the things that Donald Trump lured his political opponents into doing? Well, the first one goes back to FISA, right? They spied on him. They spied on him before he even got into office through Carter Page. But then you had Russiagate, right? And you had 2 impeachments. Now, that sets the stage for what should transpire here in the near future. But more importantly, had Trump just gone in and done that, it's unconstitutional because he's crossing from the executive branch and dipping into the State Department. And what's supposed to be under their purview. So he mentioned, I believe I heard, CISA and the FBI. So those are 2 entities that we should be well aware at this point that they're pretty corrupt. And in reality, when you look, there goes the screen. When you look at the departments that they're a part of or they're under, CISA is connected to DHS. So had Trump done exactly what his political opponents, adversaries, and or past presidents have done, then he would essentially be no different than them. And so you have to think back to 9/11, and you have to think back to Edward Snowden and WikiLeaks. Those three things. And so that's what I'm going to try to use to tie all of this together and explain it a little more. Trade secrets and state secrets. So I'm going to go ahead and play this next clip from Pat Santilli show, and I'll go ahead and let that roll. Just a second here.
I worked with some scientists who've been studying this for a quarter of a century. Their estimate was he would have picked up about 25 seats in the House and 5 or 6 seats in the Senate. He would have had a significant majority in both houses, and would have been president again. And all he had to do, in my view, and I don't mean to be, he's a 74-year-old man who was, I think, a little tired, but all he had to do, I think that history threw him a great hanging curveball. Mm-hmm. If he had taken the risk and signed that thing that Sidney and Mike were telling him to sign and unleash our approach, I think it was his Mount Rushmore moment. Because what would have happened all over the country is Americans would have discovered our voting system lacks so much integrity, there's so much cheating going on, and we would have found that when we opened the ballot boxes and counted the actual ballots, we would have discovered an enormous amount of cheating. He let the bat rest on his shoulders. I think he had a Mount Rushmore moment, and if he had swung, it would have changed the face of America for that discovery to be made. I think we would have discovered that we're a much less lefty society.
All right. So of course, a little bit of a low blow there, but essentially saying that the president didn't swing. Donald Trump didn't take action. But the truth of the matter is, had he taken action, again, he would be no better than his political adversaries and opponents and other presidents. So he needed to toe the line within the law and with the parameters of the law, because as far as we're concerned, obviously, well, I'll get to explaining about the corporation, but that's going to be brought out in this next clip, so I'll let that roll.
Well, this is the atomic concept of our tradition. It's consent of the governed, not authoritarian government, but government that derives its power from consent of the governed as determined in elections that are free, fair, and transparent. Mm-hmm. And because a couple centuries ago, our forefathers made a deal. We will surrender certain rights we have, just as human beings. We will surrender them into this corporation we are forming, called a federal government, mm-hmm. and so as to empower it to do certain things. But the quid pro quo is we're going to have elections that are free, fair, and transparent, so we can make sure this always operates under the consent of the governed. Mm. They are breaking that deal. Allowing something like this, and if the Supreme Court lets something like this slide, mm-hmm. I'd say our federal government has broken that deal. Maybe we just haven't pulled the perfect case before the Supreme Court, but Sidney Powell, I don't know if you know, but last week she got named by Law.com one of the 4 most powerful lawyers the 4th most powerful lawyer in the world. I think that Sidney might be able to, maybe there's another case that can be created that will be exactly the right case that the Supreme Court has no option but to take.
I think he's spot on with that. But where I want to direct some energy towards is when he's mentioning consent of the governed. Now, interesting is that he said it's a corporation. I don't think that says that in the Declaration of Independence. And I don't think during our country's founding we were under the impression that this was a corporation. But, I guess, being a billionaire, maybe he's got more access, privy to more information, but he's also just used to having businesses and running businesses. And so when you charter a new corporation, what's actually happening is you're beholden to your shareholders, not to the citizens. So if you try to think mirror, for example, and just make a mirror, like you look at yourself in the mirror, you can see yourself standing there. And the question you have to ask is that version of you in the mirror actually you? And obviously the answer to that question is no. But the point that I'm trying to get at is the government, through creative legal terms and legalese throughout the years, has passed and managed to pass legislation essentially taking our government and mirroring it into a corporation. So anytime you see government or senators or congressmen on TV, think that's all a movie, right? Because it's a play. What they're doing is acting within the corporation. So their whole role is to make you believe that there is an actual government in place, when in reality, it's just a corporation. So we could get into the whole, ID and capital letters of your name, and how obviously they've made copies of all of us with regard to credit reports and participating in their elections and registering. But I think it's a little bit complex for this first episode. So I see someone in the comment section brought up 1871. That's precisely when a lot of this took place. But over time, they've just gotten more and more brash with the actions they've taken. So it started with obviously taking away our actual rights, making us believe that we have a government in place, while really just having this play constantly play out through media and through, government, or what we appear to see as government. So the next place I want to take this is essentially to bring it back to Snowden and his leaks that essentially he'd put out. And so I'm going to play this next clip and hopefully be able to get a little bit deeper into this.
Bush lets U.S. spy on callers without courts. Is it constitutional to bypass the courts?
No. The Fourth Amendment prevents searches and seizures without a warrant.
That's absolutely right, Rio. Which means your commander-in-chief, the President of the United States, is breaking the law. That is what you're saying, isn't it, Rio?
Well, I guess it depends on who you talk to.
And if you talk to journalists, who more often than not don't have the full picture or neglect to report it, you only get a partial truth. Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, the FISA court. We do respect the Fourth Amendment in this country, and we issue warrants based on suspicion, but sometimes these warrants have to be issued by secret courts so we don't alert the suspects we're spying on. And these court proceedings are classified, which means, surprise, they don't appear in papers such as the New York Times. Bush lets you...
Surprise. So what he's saying there is vitally important. Obviously, there is no constitutionality. That isn't okay that the president does that or did that. And using an excuse like terrorism is also not something that should be accepted if we're under a republic form of government. But obviously, with impunity and under a corporate structure, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff, because all you got to worry about is making money at the end of the day. So with regard to that, we're going to jump into this next clip that's also from the Snowden movie, and I'll roll that right away.
They were not as thrilled to learn that we wanted them to help us spy on the Japanese population. They said it was against their laws. Of course, we tapped the entire country anyway. And we didn't stop there, because once we owned their communication system, we started going after the physical infrastructure. We'd slip these little sleeper programs into power grids, dams, hospitals, and the idea was, if the day came when Japan was no longer an ally, it'd be lights out. And it wasn't just the Japanese. We were planning malware in Mexico, Germany, Brazil, Austria. I mean, China, I can understand, or Russia, or Iran, Venezuela, okay, but Austria? You're also being ordered to follow most world leaders and heads of industry. You know, you're tracking trade deals, sex scandals, diplomatic cables to give the U.S. an advantage in negotiations at the G8, or leverage over Brazilian oil companies, or helping to oust some third world leader who's not playing ball. And ultimately, the truth sinks in that no matter what justification you're selling yourself, this is not about terrorism. Terrorism is the excuse. This is about economic, and social control. And the only thing you're really protecting is the supremacy of your government.
All right. So what he says there is the only thing you're protecting, obviously, is the supremacy of your government. Terrorism is the excuse. And so what happens is he's mentioning 9/11, brings up 9/11. You had the Department of Homeland Security, which was incorporated and essentially created through and after the actions of September the 11th through the Patriot Act. But truth be told, the precursor legislation for that bill actually was created through the Oklahoma City bombing. And none other than Joe Biden was the one who touted the fact that he was the one to write a lot of that legislation that became the Patriot Act. He's super proud of that fact. So you're connecting dots when you think about Bush and what he did unconstitutionally. Goes on to pardon himself in 2004. And so start trying to paint the picture a little bit to try to get people to see. And I'm sure most obviously know that at the end of the day, they're just doing this to enact control, to take our rights away, or at least that's how it would be perceived if it wasn't a corporation. So really, it's just a show. It's just a movie playing out. So at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter what they have to do to get the public opinion to be accepted so that these bills can pass. Before Oklahoma City, before the precursor of the bill that Joe Biden had essentially written up, before that was actually, all of these legislations were ready to go before the events actually took place. So really interesting there, because it wasn't until the events took place that, they were able to pass the legislation with no problem, or at least that's what they're selling us. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this next clip, which goes into a little bit deeper with regard to the accesses of intelligence and what they can access of yours, and whether that should be something people are okay with, or if it's time to start pushing back and stopping what's going on.
I haven't trusted anyone. Years.
It was a welcome change when they put me on terrorism watch duty. Every day I'd go in and I'd get starting points for SIGINT, which is Signals Intelligence. A lot of them were American, which felt strange, but you just keep reminding yourself, I could stop a dirty bomb attack and save thousands of lives. Thing is, you're not just following your bad guy targets, you're also following their metadata, which is basically all the phone numbers that they're in touch with. Let's say your target is a shady Iranian banker operating out of Beirut. Okay, so you're watching his stuff, but you're also watching all the people that he talks to, including, his cousin who's just some dentist living in Buffalo. And then you have to watch all of that guy's contacts. And by the time you go a third hop out from the original target, you're watching this bartender chat with her mother about Botox. Because 3 hops from anyone with, say, 40 contacts, you're looking at a list of 2.5 million people. And there's that moment when you're sitting there and the scale of it hits you. The NSA is really tracking every cell phone in the world. No matter who you are, every day of your life, you're sitting in a database, just ready to be looked at. Not just terrorists or countries or corporations, but you.
So really, really interesting, right? So when we're clicking these terms of services on any of these products, or Facebook or Twitter, YouTube, all these corporations, you're accepting to essentially more than anyone would ever bargain for if you read through it. Essentially everything you do on their platforms, everything you do connected to their platforms, or even third party or a party too, is theirs. That's their data. It's not yours. So the crazy thing is they can do this and they can act this way because it's a corporation, and that part I'll obviously get to further detail and deeper dives into within the 14th Amendment and other episodes. But for now, just take my word for it that it absolutely is a corporation. And when you think of it in that way, it's a little easier to digest and understand. So if we go back to thinking about the election and how much access that they had, do we really think that they couldn't have prevented or stopped what took place? I don't think so. If you look at Dominion, for example, they're literally, going after Sidney Powell. I think it was like a $1.6 billion defamation. They're going after Fox News, which Fox probably deserves, but, going after General Flynn. So if corporations and people were on equal standing, then you would have someone, especially someone who's a 4-star general, but someone like General Flynn, for example, would be able to fight back with regard to in a court of law. But he doesn't have that capability because corporations have this quasi-legal approach through the 14th Amendment where they're not just persons under FOIA and persons in general, but they get that odd standing that sits in between being a flesh and blood human being who's accountable to corporation that limits its liability. So essentially, where I'm trying to gear this next is back to the election and Dominion. So if Dominion writes in its contract with the State Department that it's got trade secrets, right? These are what they need to be able to turn a profit. So by exposing those trade secrets or allowing people to have access to the actual election numbers, what that would do is it would essentially threaten national security, is what they say. Is that true? No. But it would, because the corporation is running in the background. So with the illusion of government there, obviously this seems, at its most basic, not acceptable, not okay. But because there are trade secrets, and because I'm going to bring up the Dominion website, but let's go ahead and roll that. So if we look at the Dominion website, now this is their actual site, and if you go over to the security tab, we scroll down to the bottom. Excuse me. Who are their partners? This is literally on their actual website. U.S. Department of Homeland Security, CISA, Election Infrastructure, ISAC, and then here you have the Election Assistance Commission. So essentially, they're corporate partners, and they're literally telling you right on their website. They're not hiding it at all. This is their site. They're telling you that they are partnered with the departments that essentially had everything to do with the election. So if you think back to DHS and its role, if DHS is designated election infrastructure because Jay Johnson, just before Trump gets into office, if he decides that infrastructure that Dominion and ES&S and the whole lot of the rest of them are using is actually going to fall under the State Department or DC, then if Trump were to try to do something about that by getting involved or taking the servers, that's unconstitutional, right? So he doesn't want to overstep his bounds. But at the end of the day, the reality of the situation is that you just had someone who's one of the most brilliant business people in the world, who basically got to sit in the executive office. And so what Joe Biden essentially and what the deep state essentially thought that they stole was the souped up Ferrari that is the United States, right? But Trump actually, when he got in there, what he did was he basically hotboxed it, removed the engine, and got out. So now Joe Biden's in there, and probably also put a bunch of disclosure in the trunk. But basically, what they're getting into is not so much what we would think, which is a car that's, you know, souped up running as government, and here we go, we just remove all these executive orders and everything will go back to normal. No, that's not the case. So what I want to get into from there is essentially these NSA files. So when we take a look at the NSA files themselves, they're really, really interesting, because from here what we're reading is relationship and authorities. So it says leverage unique key corporate partnerships to gain access to high capacity international fiber optic cables, switches and or routers throughout the world. Collection on U.S. soil is conducted under 3 different authorities. So you have the Transit Authority, the FISA Court, and the FISA Amendments Act of 2008. So they're literally stating in this relationship and authorities document that they leverage their connections through all of these cables. So all these cables are connected, you know, around the world. So they have access to all that stuff, right? And at the end of the day, if the United States is connected to 63 countries, and you start to think about all these other countries like France, United Kingdom, essentially, you know, all your Five Eyes countries, if these are all corporations acting as quasi legal government, then it starts to paint the picture a little bit better. And so what I'm going to do is bring up this next clip on Dominion, and I'm going to go ahead and let that roll.
Today, I am saddened to report to the taxpayers of Pennsylvania and the 1.3 million voters who trusted Dominion Voting Systems with their ballots that Dominion Voting Systems has hung you out to dry and slapped you in your faces.
PA Representative Seth Grove not mincing words in Harrisburg Friday after a roundtable discussion between Dominion Voting Systems was canceled overnight. Dominion says they're under litigation and cannot answer questions at this time. Representative Grove calling their bluff.
We're putting a stop to this right now. If you're not litigated and we ask you to come before us, we expect you to fulfill your promise of coming before us.
Due to widespread evidence of vulnerabilities, including memory card infiltration and security protocol failure, the controversial Diebold election system that threatened democracy in the 2000s was never replaced due to widespread evidence of vulnerabilities.
In Volusia County, Florida, an election computer counted Al Gore's totals backwards. He had negative votes. There was an investigation into the negative votes, and it was established that the problem couldn't have been due to machine failure, because only the totals for the presidential race were affected. It looked like a second memory card may have been loaded onto the computer. Memory cards contain the votes, but this second card had disappeared, so they couldn't check it. The software that counted those votes was owned by Global Election Systems. In 2002, they were bought by the Diebold Corporation. The software is a trade secret. It's against federal and state law to look inside Diebold's voting machines.
I was the chief technical advisor to the Secretary of State of the largest state in the United States, and I was not allowed to look at the software running in Diebold or any other vendor's voting systems. To this day, I have not been allowed to look.
Diebold merely changed its name to Premier Election Solutions in 2007. In 2009, Election Systems and Software acquired aka Premier Election Solutions, and after the Department of Justice filed a civil antitrust lawsuit against Election Systems and Software, requiring it to divest voting equipment systems assets it acquired from Premier Election Solutions, the company then sold those assets to Dominion Voting Systems.
Today.
So essentially a swamp of election connection companies, corporations, right? So why didn't Trump just go in there and, you know, we have all the data, we have it all. Why didn't he expose this fraud for what it is? And that's like the prime question, right? And the answer to that question is that, again, had he done so, we wouldn't expose the underbelly that is the swamp, and just how corrupt they've turned this entire corporation and corporate structure worldwide. How they've been doing it, how they've been getting away with it, that wouldn't be thwarted. So Trump has to be out of the executive office. You have to have a Neanderthal like Joe Biden slip his way into office. And so people also kind of forget that John Durham Jr. Still has his investigation going. So he is able to still collect evidence and has been able to collect evidence this entire time. So if you're trying to catch these people in the act and catch them doing insanely crooked and corrupt things like passing legislation that they shouldn't, this is kind of the perfect way to do so. And what I want to do next is basically I'm going to play a clip from Edward Snowden, and he goes into explaining this pretty good, better than I can do myself. So I'm going to go ahead and let that roll, and hopefully the dots are starting to connect a little bit.
When I came forward to reveal the first system of global, truly global mass surveillance back in 2013, which was being run not just by the United States government, but actually a real-life conspiracy, as hard as that is to believe. It's a real thing. It's in government documents. You can look at it online. Even the White House has refused to deny it. Of a group called the Five Eyes. These are the Anglophone governments, which would be the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. And the revelation of this activity, which functioned, for those of you who don't recall, excuse me, by working with companies, right? This was a collaboration between corporate and government power, and government in the United States. This began under the Bush administration and was embraced and extended by Obama, and it's continued to get worse under the current administration. They would go to the largest web platforms in our country and in your country and everywhere else. Each government would go to their own, and they would try to induce them into willful cooperation, in most cases beyond what the law required, by appealing to a sense of patriotism or a desire to increase public safety. And where that wouldn't work, in many other cases, coercion. And they would get these groups to act as agents of government, be able to hand over your entire Gmail account, everything you've ever typed into Facebook, clicked on Facebook, every site you've ever gone to where you're logged into Facebook, but it just has that like button on the page. All of that was recorded, right? And it was poured into a system that didn't just touch internet connections, but it touched phone calls and everything else. And this is a global heat map of where the surveillance was happening most intensely, just from the US part of the operation. So unfortunately, this doesn't reflect Canada's numbers. But you see some unusual things here. You see stuff that wouldn't surprise you. You see the war zone is sort of red hot. And you see China is getting closer red. Red means more surveillance, right? But an unusual thing is you would see a traditional adversary like Russia is actually less intensely monitored than the United States itself. You see Germany is being intensely surveilled, things like that, traditional allies. And this surprised a lot of people because we'd constantly been told this was for our own good, it was for our own protection. And the only reason we weren't told about this was because if we knew, people would die. But when you actually looked at top secret documents, and all of these materials were classified before the days of 2013, their own documents written by their own lawyers said that the real reason these programs were classified was because they feared this is their own words, quote, damaging public debate. And that's about the scale of their activities, and that would open them up to legal challenges because they know they had gone far beyond the law. Even by their own counting, the U.S. National Security Agency, they're the ones in charge of sort of this mass surveillance operation internationally, and the FBI does a lot of the tapping domestically. By their own count, they were violating our laws thousands of times a year. I think 2,776 times in a single quarter. When I came,
so the important takeaways there are seeing that just how much data and information is there, just with the data that he had leaked throughout the corporate connections. But he's going to get to a point in these next few clips that touches on an even bigger and more important topic, which is immunity. And so when you think of it from that broader perspective, we do have a lot of this information already. We have a lot more. Obviously, we have more than we know, to be cheeky. But at the end of the day, you have the WikiLeaks cables. WikiLeaks cables. You have all of the information that WikiLeaks has that you can forensically verify and trace back to make sure that obviously they're authentic. 100% authentication record and publishing record. And that goes to show you why they're going after Julian Assange so much. And, you know, they, at the end of the day, they don't give a shit, right? They don't care about our rights. They don't care about whether they're spying on us or not. The idea at the end of the day for a corporation is, as long as it's making money and as long as public opinion is swayed, then they're in the clear. So as long as they can lie to us and appear to have our consent unwittingly, but take our consent without us even knowing, and essentially, you know, act with impunity, creating more and more legislation that's all, you know, unconstitutional, and just taking our rights away one presidency at a time, while we're appearing to believe that what's actually happening is, you know, you've got these presidents that are going and coming from office. Well, we'll touch on next is in this next clip. He'll get into a little bit more detail, and then I'll try to connect some more dots.
After September 11th, the policies of the United States changed. Now, it's interesting and very historically important to understand that this plan for this new system of mass surveillance was not created in the wake of 9/11. In fact, it had already been written. The U.S. Patriot Act, you all may have potentially heard of, which really changed the way our surveillance and sort of counterterrorism strategies worked, had been sitting on a shelf for years, ready to go. But our legislature didn't believe they were in a position where they could pass it. There wasn't that kind of support. But after the entire nation had been victimized, everyone was grieving and angry and fearful. It passed with, I think, only a single dissenting vote. And now we live in this new world, right? And the program started slowly, and they started intensely secretly.
So started slowly, started after 9/11, actually was written before 9/11. Pretty messed up, right? So we'll obviously touch on 9/11 in the near future, but obviously we lost a lot of our rights after 9/11. And so with regard to that, after 9/11 happens, you have the Department of Homeland Security taking over and basically incorporating all aspects that may have been left over or been appeared to be left over, and merge them into one incorporated structure under DHS. So did that make our country safer? Did it provide us with any sort of benefit? Probably not. And I would actually say no, not at all. And even more than that, it just allowed them to get away with all of the unconstitutional bullshit that they're passing and doing, without having to look over their shoulder or worry if they're going to get caught or not. Because at the end of the day, if everything is kept under secret courts or inside of these judicial entities that we believe are actually courts, they're not, obviously. The whole entire district court system is actually beholden to the crown, and so that one we'll get in more towards the end of the episode. But I'm going to roll this next clip and let Snowden explain a little bit more before I touch on the next point.
The author of the Patriot Act since 2013 has said he did not believe, it was not his intent and it was not his understanding that the Patriot Act or any of the laws passed since then authorized these activities at all. But the intelligence agencies secretly interpreted the laws in such a way that they believed that they did. And they didn't need to inform the full body of our legislature about that. We have 535 members in our legislature that are sort of our public representatives. Instead, they told only 8. These are called famously the Gang of 8. These are the most senior members of both the Senate and the House in the United States, so sort of our two chambers, the upper and lower house, if you will, which would be the ranking members of the majority and minority party for both houses, and then the ranking members of the majority and minority party sitting on the 2 intelligence committees, one in each house, right? And the judgment of these 8 people alone, not even really the judgment because they're just giving them a notification, it's the executive who's chopping off on this, was substituted for everyone else in the Congress and everyone else in the nation. We were never granted an explicit vote, not allowed to challenge these things in court. Whenever we got court cases or any kind of evidence or newspaper reports that indicated this kind of activity was happening, the government would say, we can neither confirm nor deny these activities are occurring. And as a result of this, you can't challenge it in court because you can't prove it. And if you can prove it, it's a state secret. And if it is a state secret, the court can't rule on the matter because to make the government defend it is to make the government admit it. And that by itself is harming the national security. And the court can't even judge whether or not it is harming national security under the US system because they say the branch best positioned to judge matters of national security is the executive, who, if these programs were not harming national security, would have committed the gravest criminal and constitutional violations and probably in the modern history of the country. And so you can see how it forms a system of incentives that paralyzes the body of oversight, right?
So that clip is, that part is huge, right? So he's saying if the government rules that this is a state secret, then you cannot even rule on it in court. So why did all of those election cases get thrown out? Potentially because they don't have jurisdiction under the courts. But if you look at it from the perspective of state secrets, if it's a matter of national security, and if what matters more to the corporation or the government is that they present the idea that the nation is secure and that the elections are secure, that then takes precedent and becomes more important than you actually finding out that the election was either A, messed with, manipulated, or not what it seems, and or B, stolen. So at the end of the day, if trade secrets cannot be entered into a court of law, that would stand to reason why there's no evidence. Because if the evidence is a trade or state secret, then how can that be entered into a court of law or a district court? The answer is that it can't, because if Trump, the only way Trump could actually do something about it, right, would be to violate the Constitution. So he would have to do what the other presidents have done, which is, passing FISA, passing 2004 FOIA. And so the catch-22 then becomes, they've obviously been caught, right? But at the end of the day, you have to allow the people to understand that, because it's the consent of the governed, or what we appear to be as governed, through our consent and through registering for their election system, and by having a driver's license or a social security card. By all of those things, that's us participating in their system. And that's hard to grasp, but when you look at the bare bones laws that they appear to have passed, most of them actually weren't even passed constitutionally, let alone been legally or lawfully put into place. And so then you have to ask yourself, do we continue to allow this to happen, or do we realize that the power that they appear to have over us is just that, right? It's just it's an illusion of power. So as long as we accept what's happening and don't fight back, and by fight back I don't mean like taking any sort of physical action. I'm fighting back with the pen, fighting back legally, and litigation. That's essentially what has to happen. That's what we need to do, is expose and wake up the rest of the masses who seem to be asleep at the wheel. And it's definitely not their fault, because you have to remember these actions have been taking place through mainstream media and through what we've thought is a lawful government for hundreds of years. And it's nothing new. So having classes of citizens and taking the issue and trying to make it a racial one, or taking the issue and trying to make it trying to get us to focus on anything other than themselves, the government, is what they want. They want us to lose track of what happened and just, corruption is corruption. we'll let it go. We can't do anything about it. Well, that's the problem right there. Looking for a savior and hoping and clutching onto someone else coming and resolving these issues is exactly the mindset that's not going to get us through this, because I think a lot of this operation had to do with teaching us that you as in each and every individual is the key to this, right? So when you understand that their illusion of power over you is only one that you have to consent to participate in, it's as simple as saying enough. I'm withdrawing from this system of or form of corporation that lists us as chattel, essentially. And by showing everyone that someone like Austin Steinbart could actually be Q, and obviously is, but just showing everyone, showing the world that, like, okay, look, this is an average Joe for the most part, as far as what he's been through is obviously not, but just showing everyone that it could be anyone. It could be someone who, this was something that he did in terms of unlocking all that he has. And if it couldn't be your average everyday citizen, then it doesn't show the power that we have, because we truly hold the power over these entities and corporations. So by everyone being shocked and awed, and it being slightly biblical, that Austin's been chastised, berated, mocked, made fun of, but then now he's going through the system. He's been put into the system, and now, just like others who have to go through this, it's going to resonate with them a lot more, because they've been through the federal system. They've been had it as far as being put in jail for things that realistically they shouldn't be in prison for. So he's able to now, because he's been through it, recollect and explain to everyone just how bad it really has gotten. And you're not going to be humbled if someone just hands you power. Then we're pretty much right back where we started. If he came in on military jets and was right away, you knew right off the rip that, okay, this guy's definitely who he says he is. That's no different than what's been happening over the years, where people, because of family affiliations or because of class or financial circumstances, they get elevated inside of our inside of our system, right? We elevate them to a level that they shouldn't be, but just because they're part of a certain family, or because their dad was whoever, right? Like, at the end of the day, if it wasn't possible for any one of us to take back the power from these entities or these other people, then it defeats the purpose. So everybody collectively coming together and helping to wake each other up every bit as much as we can, more and more, is really the key to a lot of this. So excuse me, this next point that I want to play is really, really going to center and hone in on a lot of what will kind of bring this message with the corporations and the election home. So I'm going to go ahead and let that roll.
We were not allowed to challenge these things in court. Whenever we got court cases or any kind of evidence or newspaper reports that indicated this kind of activity was happening, the government would say, we can neither confirm nor deny these activities are occurring. And as a result of this, you can't challenge it in court because you can't prove it. And if you can prove it, it's a state secret. And if it is a state secret, the court can't rule on the matter because to make the government defend it is to make the government admit it. And that by itself is harming the national security. And the court can't even judge whether or not it is harming national security under the US system because they say the branch best positioned to judge matters of national security is the executive, who, if these programs were not harming national security, would have committed the gravest criminal and constitutional violations and probably in the modern history of the country. And so you can see how it forms a system of incentives that paralyzes the body of oversight, right? We were not allowed to challenge these things in court.
All right, so I ran that clip back again just so everyone can hear it again, because I really think that that's imperative to understanding what's been going on. So then you go circling back to the election. And so here is, I'm going to bring up actually, just a moment here. Here is documentation from a Senate or Congress rather, investigatory committee that was investigating on December 6th of 2019, HIG Capital LLC. Let me go ahead and bring up the next one. And you had investigations for the McCarthy Group, and most importantly, where is the last one? Oh, page 3, 2, 1. Here we go. Staples Street Capital Group. So Staples Street Capital Group is the precursor or the firm that essentially funded and owned Dominion, right? Investment in Dominion voting systems. So who was it that was investigating these election companies? Well, none other than Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, Ron Wyden, and Mark Pocan. So it's a catch-22, right? Because they're investigating and blocking, essentially. They're blocking any sort of investigation that could take place. And so it also prevents anyone else from looking into it as far as the government's concerned. So if Trump were to overstep those bounds, well, it's a catch-22, right? Because they're clearly already caught, and there has been no update on this. Now, it could be that that's because there's trade secrets within the information they were devolving or bringing out. But at the end of the day, these are two of the people that actually ran for president. You know, like, and so they were just blocking the investigation into these election companies. So what would appear to be an actual ethical letters to these companies or corporations to, hey, send us your information, you know, give us all this information regarding the election, because, you know, you guys haven't fixed your election systems or your election machines in years. And at the end of the day, nothing came of this. So it was just a means to block anyone else from looking into it. So if you try to paint that picture with regard to 9/11, why hasn't anything been done with that? It's honestly mind-blowing that it's almost 20 years on from September 11th, and the case for the 4 terrorists that are purported to have been that are laying, you know, having the blame placed upon them, because they're, you know, until they're guilty in a court of law, I can't technically say they're the ones who did it. And so that case hasn't even started yet. I mean, it's 20 years on, and that 9/11 case has not even started yet, hasn't even taken place. So think about that. You know, think about that for a moment with regard to all that happened and all that went on. You know, the way exactly, Spirit of Meadows hit on it perfectly. The way that World Trade Center 7 fell. Did that make any sense? I don't think so. It defies the laws of physics. And so this next clip actually will play into this perfectly. It's a bit of a long one, but I think it encapsulates exactly what we're going into perfectly. So I'll go ahead and let that roll.
A coincidence.
On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 men armed with box cutters, directed by a man on dialysis in a cave fortress halfway around the world using a satellite phone and a laptop, directed the most sophisticated penetration of the most heavily defended airspace in the world, overpowering the passengers and the military combat-trained pilots on 4 commercial aircraft before flying those planes wildly off course for over an hour without being molested by a single fighter interceptor. These 19 hijackers, devout religious fundamentalists who like to drink alcohol, snort cocaine, and live with pink-haired strippers, managed to knock down 3 buildings with 2 planes in New York, While in Washington, a pilot who couldn't handle a single-engine Cessna was able to fly a 757 in an 8,000-foot descending 270-degree corkscrew turn to come exactly level with the ground, hitting the Pentagon in the Budget Analyst Office where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld had announced missing from the Pentagon's coffers in a press conference the day before, on September 10th, 2001.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
$2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America.
Luckily, the news anchors knew who did it within minutes.
Osama bin Laden.
The pundits knew within hours.
Osama bin Laden.
The administration knew within the day.
Terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them.
And the evidence literally fell into the FBI's lap.
That a hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
But for some reason, a bunch of crazy conspiracy theorists demanded an investigation into the greatest attack on American soil in history. That investigation was delayed, underfunded, set up to fail, a conflict of interest, and a cover-up from start to finish. It was based on testimony extracted through torture, the records of which were destroyed. It failed to mention the existence of WTC-7, Able Danger, P-TECH, Sibel Edmonds, OBL and the CIA, and the drills of hijacked aircraft being flown into buildings that were being simulated at the precise same time that those events were actually happening. It was lied to by the Pentagon, the CIA, the Bush administration, and as for Bush and Cheney, well, no one knows what they told it because they testified in secret, off the record, not under oath, and behind closed doors. It didn't bother to look at who funded the attacks because that question is ultimately of little practical significance. Still, the 9/11 Commission did brilliantly answering all of the questions the public had, except most of the victims' family members' questions, and pinned blame on all the people responsible, although no one so much as lost their job, determining the attacks were
failure of imagination.
Because
nobody in our government, at least, and I don't think the prior government that could envision flying airplanes into buildings.
Except the Pentagon, FEMA, NORAD, and the NRO. The DIA destroyed 2.5 terabytes of data on Able Danger, but that's okay because it probably wasn't important. The SEC destroyed their records on the investigation into the insider trading before the attacks, but that's okay because destroying the records of the largest investigation in SEC history is just part of routine record keeping.
Federal officials have begun a major investigation into whether someone or many people benefited financially from the evil done to the country last Tuesday. Not long before the attacks occurred, there were some financial transactions in the stock market that may indicate knowledge of the attack before it began. ABC's Antonio Mora is here. Whether they ever get to, if they ever get to the bottom of it, it will be astonishing.
Astonishing, no question, Peter. What many Wall Street analysts believe is that the terrorists made bets that a number of stocks would see their prices fall. They did so by buying what are called puts. If you bet right, the rewards can be huge. The risks are also huge, unless, of course, you know something bad is going to happen to the company you're betting against.
This could very well be insider trading at the worst, most horrific, most evil use you've ever seen in your entire life.
One example, United Airlines. The Thursday before the attack, more than 2,000 contracts betting that the stock would go down were purchased. 90 times more in one day than in 3 weeks. When the markets reopened, United's stock dropped. The price of the contracts soared, and someone may have made a lot of money fast.
$180,000 turns into $2.4 million when that plane hits the World Trade Center.
It's almost the same story with American Airlines.
That's a five-fold increase in the value of what was a $337,000 trade on Monday.
All of a sudden becomes what?
$1.8 million.
And there's much more, including an extraordinarily high number of bets against Morgan Stanley and Marsh & McLennan, two of the World Trade Center's biggest tenants. Could this be a coincidence?
This would be one of the most extraordinary coincidences in the history of mankind if it was a coincidence.
It is absolutely unprecedented to see cases of insider trading covering the entire world, from Japan to the United States and North America to Europe.
ABC News has now learned that the Chicago Board of Options Exchange launched their investigation into the unusual trading last week. That may have given them enough time to stop anyone from profiting from death here in the U.S. It may also give investigators, Peter, a hot trail that might lead them to the terrorists.
Thanks very much. As a reminder of the complications here, though, the Secretary of the Treasury said today of this investigation, you've got to go through 10 veils before you get to the real source. Yep. Thanks, Antonio.
NIST has classified the data that they used for their model of WTC-7's collapse, but that's okay because knowing how they made their model of the collapse would jeopardize public safety. The FBI has argued that all material related to their investigation of 9/11 should be kept secret from the public, but that's okay because the FBI probably has nothing to hide. This man never existed, nor is anything he had to say worthy of your attention, and if you say otherwise, you are a paranoid conspiracy theorist and deserve to be shunned by all of humanity. Likewise him, and her. And her, and her, and him. Osama bin Laden lived in a cave fortress in the hills of Afghanistan, but somehow got away. Then he was hiding out in Tora Bora, but somehow got away. Then he lived in Abbottabad for years, taunting the most comprehensive intelligence dragnet employing the most sophisticated technology in the history of the world for a decade, releasing video after video with complete impunity and getting younger and younger as he did so, before finally being found in a daring SEAL team raid which wasn't recorded on video, in which he didn't resist or use his wife as a human shield, and in which these crack special forces operatives panicked and killed this unarmed man, supposedly the best source of intelligence about those dastardly terrorists on the entire planet. Then they dumped his body in the ocean before telling anyone about it. Then a couple dozen of that team's members died in a helicopter crash in Afghanistan. If you have any questions about this story, you are a batshit paranoid tinfoil dog-abusing baby hater and will be reviled by everyone. If you love your country and or freedom, happiness, rainbows, rock and roll, puppy dogs, apple pie, and your grandma, you will never ever express doubts about any part of this story to anyone.
No, I always imagine myself making great plays, but you never think about being MVP.
Investigate 9/11. 9/11 was perpetrated by people within our own government.
All right. Is everybody all right?
What a coincidence.
So interesting, right? All of that, you know, and we're still exactly where we started. Nothing has been, you know, nothing has been determined. The cases, the investigations, we've gotten nowhere. And what's crazy is, it's amazing that you have actually citizen journalists and people, everyday people that have put what's gone on together better than anyone else. And of course, mainstream media doesn't report on it at all. It's nowhere to be found, no information on it whatsoever. So the amount of evidence that's there, though, is damning, and it's you can't it's unavoidable. And to move forward or move on or attempt to move past it is absolutely egregious. And I see that a lot of people are into Mr. Corbett. Yeah, he's definitely one of my favorite sources for information. Really, really brilliant. I will definitely put a link to his channel and the videos that I've put into, that I've linked to or put into this podcast so far. So getting into the last bits and pieces. If it's an action that's taking place, and as a result of that action, our rights are being thwarted and being taken away, and irregardless of the fact that these people are sick and that they don't care, something has to be done, right? Something other than just allowing this to continue and hoping for a savior. So what I'm, the things that I'm focusing on essentially are the law itself, right? So reading it, digesting it, trying to understand it better. And unfortunately, the cesspool gets just deeper and deeper. But you have to understand, the laws that govern your world, and you as a person. You have to read into it. You have to understand what they're actually doing and what they've done, and you'll start to see that they messed up, right? As badly as they'd wanted to, pretend like none of this happened. If they never expected for her to lose, then as soon as Trump got into office, all he had to do was some carefully crafted legislation, as Austin says, changing and thwarting some of the treaties in the background. So undoing the machinery for the corporation, essentially setting it up to fail. And they can't really go after him because if you guys remember, he donated all of his salary. So they can't claw back and, go claw back after him and sue him. And well, I'm sure they can, but from a perspective of what he walked away with, he donated all of his salaries. So there's really nothing, there's not much more other than them setting their own precedent by investigating him unconstitutionally, illegally. And so if you look at it from the perspective of had the government arrested, had mass arrests, and everything were to have taken place, and everything would have gone out and played out that way, the underlying underbelly of the swamp would have never been taken care of, because the problem is the legal system itself, and just how bad the corruption has gotten, and just how I guess I would say mind controlled to an extent, right? The average Joe right now, the average person is walking around thinking that, the Neanderthal in office right now is actually someone that should be there. That's crazy. And so it's a pretty wild psyop, but at the end, there's a light at the end of the tunnel, and people coming together and exposing the mix-ups and the things that they've made mistakes on is going to be key to all this, because there are over 200 sourced books that show a different 13th Amendment among 24 states, which happens to be the number of stars around Austin's Phoenix. Now, I have not spoken to him. I don't know if I haven't confirmed that, at least with regard to the 24 stars, but 24 states have passed and implemented the Titles of Nobility Act. So that's pretty interesting. And what I'm going to do now is actually going to roll this next clip to tie Biden in just a little bit more, just to kind of try to show you that they really do not care. They didn't care, and even going back to Oklahoma City, this basically loops everything back together, connecting Clinton, Biden, and the FBI and the other great intelligence agencies. So I'll go ahead and let that roll.
Secondly, an ATF that had suffered a severe backlash from its mishandling of events at Ruby Ridge and Waco could win public support and sympathy by parading as the victim of anti-government crazies. Thirdly, it provided new life to the Omnibus Counterterrorism Act of 1995, a controversial bill introduced by Joe Biden 2 months before the bombing that would have given police broad new powers to use secret sources and secret evidence in terrorism proceedings. Widely denounced as an affront to civil liberties, the bill was languishing in committee. But all that changed on April 19, 1995. The very day after the blast at the Murrah Building, the New York Times wrote about the bill that, after the Oklahoma City bombing, there are few surer legislative bets in Washington. The legislation morphed into the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act of 1996 and was passed the next year, with President Clinton specifically linking the bill to the bombing in his signing statement. Years later, Biden claimed that his original bill was the core of what eventually became the Patriot Act. Fourthly, the bombing also conveniently destroyed a number of documents that were proving to be problematic for the Clinton administration. Documents that had all somehow or other ended up being housed at the Murrah Building in Oklahoma City in April of 1995.
Day one, hour two of the bombing, the most significant event that happened is when they said they found other bombs in the building. The second most significant event was that they moved everybody back and held them back. There were still people alive trapped in the building, but they came in with 2 trucks and backed them up to the Murrah Building, and a bunch of these guys dressed in blue jackets with no letters on the back started taking boxes of files out and putting them on this truck.
We were told by a blonde female agent that there were files so serious to the government that until those files were located, there would not be any recovery effort.
If you remember the Whitewater investigation in Arkansas, all the paperwork was stored in the Murrah Building. They had FBI agents over in the fields to the west of the Murrah Building picking up paper almost all day long.
And it was during this time that early in the investigation that I started receiving some various phone calls. One of them was a phone call from Little Rock, Arkansas. The guy said that he was a federal agent. He was not an FBI agent. He was not ATF. But what he did say was during their investigation of the Clintons, on all the drug running that went through Mena, Arkansas, and Lassiter's Ranch and all of that stuff that was going on at the time during Iran-Contra, that those records, when Clinton went to Washington, were transferred from there to the Murrah building.
Secondly,
convenient, right? Pretty convenient. So what's so fucked up about that clip is that there were literally dying children in the daycare center of the Murrah building. And so as you just heard there, some sort of agent called, didn't identify what agency they were from, but essentially directed everyone to dip up out of the location because they needed to gather the documents. And then the gentleman, in that clip there says, well, there are people that are, trapped under the buildings. What are we supposed to do? And the response of the agent was, until we get those documents secured, we are not going to help them. There's nothing that we're going to do for them. So just think about how sick you have to be to state that. And I've gone into the Oklahoma City bombing story quite a bit, and it gets worse and worse. I would say that Timothy McVeigh was an inside agent, and contracted and working. And he actually, in his own words, has stated so. Said it to a couple of the people that were in his cell with him, that he was going to get away with it, and so on and so forth. But that's probably for another day. At the end of the day, though, it just goes to show you that these people don't give a shit. They don't care, and the only way that things are going to get better is to stop allowing them to do this with impunity, and essentially not give a shit what they think of what we say, or how we feel, or what we want to be different. Because when you look at what they feed us after these incidents take place, we will never forget, right? You heard that probably a couple of thousand times with regard to recent attacks or other attacks, 2001, 9/11. So I mean, it's disturbing and it's messed up. But now I'll try to circle back and get into some positive news and positive updates. So how do you fight back? How do you go into this with a positive mindset, right? How do you undo a lot of what's going on? Well, after, coincidentally, right now, this is going to be hypotheticals, but coincidentally, after 2002, when DHS is formed, and shortly after 9/11, if we look into this company, SpaceX. So let's bring this up really quick. So what is this company, right? And when was it formed? Well, it was formed on May the 6th of 2002, 18 years ago. So really coincidental that DHS comes together and is passed. Essentially, 9/11 happens. NORAD, a lot of the air intelligence got thwarted through these people and what they do. And so this private company is founded by Elon Musk, excuse me. So is that a coincidence? I don't think so. And if you look into how do you fight the beast of these corporations that have corporate immunity, and the ability to hide trade secrets and call everything a trade secret, well, you do that by forming another corporation, and keeping your interests private until you can fix the problem and then circle back, right? Like Jen Psaki, the in the Biden administration, like she says, circle back. But it's interesting, right? If the jurisdiction for all of everything that these people are operating and running, for example, the cables and Five Eyes and sharing information among other corporations / governments. If that's going on within the jurisdiction of land, sea, air, the natural soil, like you can go, I mean, it's nonsense at the end of the day. But if they have that jurisdiction covered, then how do you escape that jurisdiction? How do you get outside that jurisdiction? I would assume potentially Starlink. That's one route, right? If information is shared in space, and I'll bring up jurisdiction. Yes, yeah, and we'll get into some comments now because we're winding towards the end of this presentation. But anybody have any questions? I guess I'll throw that out there while I'm pulling this up. Let's see, Starlink, yes. And then another point, right? If the SEC, which Building 7, I mean, if you look at the list of companies that were inside of Building 7, it's honestly mind-boggling. So here's a little list, right? So just to touch on this really quickly, on 7th and 8th floors of Building 7, you had American Express Bank. 9th and 10th floors, you had the U.S. Secret Service. 11 through 13, you had the Securities and Exchange Commission. Is that ringing any bells? You got National Association of Insurance Commissioners. So a bunch of insurance companies, bunch of federal banks, a bunch of OEM, Office of Emergency Management, the Internal Revenue Service, Central Intelligence Agency, Department of Defense, Internal Revenue Service again. Just insane, honestly. But to think that all these documents, there were about, I think it was, they said 4,000 some odd investigations in the SEC inside of Building 7. 4,000 investigations that were going on within the SEC into these banks and into these entities that themselves were actually in the buildings themselves, tenants of the buildings. Those all just happened to go away, just happened to disappear. Just at least from what we know, right? I would hope that that this will be exposed, but who knows? It's disturbing. But when you think about it from a perspective of financially, there's a case right now, right, against Ripple, that the SEC is pretty much being embarrassed and looking really stupid throughout. And so think about this for a second. If discovery has been ordered and the SEC has been now, I think they'd stated in one of their court documents from their rebuttal to them being ordered to provide discovery for how they determined that Bitcoin and Ethereum were in fact not securities. And so that's really interesting, right? They said, they replied saying, we're not the ones on trial. It's like, no, you're the fucking idiots that are caught up in this shit, and now it's your time to look stupid. So just throwing this out there, but what happens when it's determined that Bitcoin and Ethereum were never, potentially, I don't know the actual truth of this, but when you look at it bare bones, what happens when they pull those discovery documents out and it turns out that those companies never actually had communication with the SEC, and that they just were determined to be assets, or assets through the good graces, probably some sort of corrupt decision making. But who are they going to reach out to? Are they going to reach out to Satoshi Nakamoto? Is he going to be compelled to testify and provide documents? A guy who doesn't even exist? I don't know. I don't think so. But it's highly interesting. But let's read some comments. Thank you for saying that, Ed. I appreciate it. Let's see. Does the SAIC own the energy weapons used? I'm not sure, actually. Let me look into that. SAIC. I know with regard to energy weapons, a lot of it's like hard to trace because they funnel everything offshore, and they black operations and everything's a state secret. So it's really hard to determine like what is what with regard to that. But connecting dots and trying to, I mean, a lot of people have already laid the groundwork for these investigations, and they've done them, through citizen journalism, which is amazing. But I guess it'd be interesting to look into. Let's see. Hold on to your XRP for sure. Definitely do that. That's really, really good idea. 47 floors Masonic tell. Ooh, that's interesting. I know with regard to, let's see, apparently the SEC agreed with FinCEN, at least back in 2016. The SEC must now explain to the court how a digital currency transformed to a digital security. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, they're the ones on trial, it would appear now. It's wild, but this is, I'll bring up a couple things that I think people will find really intriguing and interesting. So this is the Illinois Attorney General website, right? You can go to the website, it's right there, illinoisattorneygeneral.gov. And so I just want to show you guys, if we take a look, this is on their own about page. And if you look, it's pretty far down, but there it is, right? So it states, the powers generally understood to belong to the Attorney General at common law have been summarized as follows. First, to prosecute all actions necessary for the protection and defense of the property and revenues of the Crown. Second, by information to bring certain classes of persons accused of crimes and misdemeanors to trial. Third, by, I don't know how to say these words, sciri facias, to revoke and annul grants made by the Crown improperly or when forfeited by the grantee thereof. This is fourth, by information to recover money or other chattels or damages for wrongs committed on the land or other possessions of the Crown. And it says fifth, by writ, which writ is an English common law term. So anytime you see writ, yeah, right, crazy, huh? This is literally on the website right now. You can go to the website and see it like for yourself. It's pretty wild. So it says, by writ of quo warranto, to determine the right of him who claims or usurps any office, franchise, or liberty, and to vacate the charter or annul the existence of a corporation for violations of its charter, or for omitting to exercise its corporate powers. So what I find super interesting about this right here is it's almost like a double negative. Like, so if all courts are beholden to the Crown, and so all attorneys general are beholden to the Crown, and I've asked a lot of lawyers this question. I've asked specifically, who do you swear your oath to? And they said, I actually don't even remember. I've only sworn my oath one time. Well, who did you swear your oath to? The court. So they don't even swear any constitutional oath. They don't. That's not something they do because the bar is a corporation. And I'm not trying to harp on that, but that's how they get around all this stuff. It's all about corporations. So if they're able to be an entity without actually having a soul or body, and yet they are allowed. Corporations literally have free speech. They can donate to whoever they want politically, and it's through the Supreme Court. It's been allowed to happen and take place. So the idea that that's going on in our world, and I mean, I don't know anyone, not a single person, that would stand up for corporations. They're the worst entities on the planet. They lie about everything. They hide behind limited liability. So you're passing the ball down and you're passing it on, so that they never get in trouble. But how insane is it that this is literally the Illinois Attorney General website, and it's showing you the cases and the cited terminology that this is all referenced under, and it's literally explaining to you that it's the representation of the Crown and that it was translated over from the Old English common law system, and that's the system that our laws are based on. Well, I don't know, but that seems to me like it's a pretty big problem. If our law is completely determined and held liable to the crown, which at the end of the day, getting deep into it, it's not the death racket crown, but it's the crown of court, which ties back to Germany and the real people in power. But just want to show you guys this really quick because I've been mentioning it obviously all day. So this, if you go to here it is. So if you go to the state of Delaware, and a lot of these, although they're corporations, right, you still have to file documentation for them. So here is literally the Delaware County website, state of Delaware rather, website, delaware.gov. And if you're pulling up, we'll actually do it. I'll do it live really quick. Let's delete that one. Proceed anyway. So I just want to do this live so you guys can see. So if you go to this website and you search United States of America, and there it is right there. So there's United States Corporation, and then you have the United States of America Incorporated. And the crazy thing is, look at where, now when you see closed corp too, just really quickly, that doesn't mean that the corporation is closed. What it means is when you click here on entity type, it brings up this information. And so the entity type C is what they call a closed corp. So it's a closed corporation, is a corporation organized under subchapter 342, whose certificate of incorporation contains the provisions required by section 102 of this title, and in addition provides that all this nonsense. So it doesn't mean the entity is no longer in existence. It just means that it's this type C corporation. So where was this registered? Wilmington and the county of Newcastle. And when you actually pull even more information into, just a second here. Here it is. So when you bring up more information with regard to where this all trails back to, you end up the White House showing registration under the United States of America Limited, tying back to the United Kingdom, but more importantly, first incorporated in 1868. Oh, 1 second here, pull that back up. Edinburgh, I don't think I'm saying that properly, but Edinburgh, Lothian, and Scotland. So if people remember where the D6 headquarters is, that's in Edinburgh. And so interesting that that's the registration location. And yeah, so home office in Scotland, and wild. So that is pretty interesting information, right? All that crack evidence. Jan Red, Trusts and Foundations, they're almost identical. Yeah, actually, Jan McCain was the one who, him and a couple others created the 501c3 nonprofit. So that's his doing. But let's see if I can find anything else interesting. What's Trump's heritage? He's got royal blood. Him and Hillary both have royal blood. He's Scottish, and I forget the second. Scottish, and let me bring it up. But speaking of Trump, I don't think people really realize, just how far back a lot of what he's been involved in and been doing goes with regard to that. Let me bring it up. I do have his familial lineage because I'm a loser. Let's see. I'll play this in the meantime. Actually, this is a pretty interesting clip. the best way I find to the best thing I've found to research and literally dig up information has been to utilize like the opposition research that others do, and this is one of these clips. It was a documentary that essentially was trying to attack Trump and demean him, and I find the majority of like really interesting facts that I find out about or things that I didn't know before actually comes from the opposition research that they've done, which is interesting. So I'll put a link for this clip here, but I'll just let you guys watch this really quick.
Trump screamed and shouted and threatened lawsuits, and it was never broadcast. But now we think it's time for you to see it, because the new Trump and the old Trump are the same Trump.
He's a frequent and generous campaign contributor to the council president. He is explaining to Stein that the contributions of some of his New Jersey associates are in violation of the new campaign laws. He's going to take them back and fix the problem.
Right down. One guy from New Jersey, Andrew Stein. Andrew Stein, if you don't mind, I'll take a pass and get him corrected. You don't mind, eh?
He doesn't miss a beat doing it, nor does he miss a camera turned in his direction.
Boy, there's a lot of coverage tonight.
He was the best-known businessman in America. Compared to Lee Iacocca, he was Schwarzenegger. He was Stallone. Maybe he was even Elvis.
Look, I'm making him a star. Look at this.
He gets more headlines for what he doesn't do than what he does, because he's news just by showing up.
Donald was the young man the second-generation boy who was going to conquer Manhattan. And he stood with me once in his park after we'd had an intense negotiation in which we fought, and as we often did. And he pointed to all these buildings around, just about here. And he said to me, I'm going to be bigger than Helmsley in 5 years.
Trump made his first move for 2 large sites, a few miles apart and bordering on the Hudson River. They were owned by the Penn Central Railroad, but the railroad was bankrupt, and the properties were up for sale. As Donald Trump saw it, the opportunity was ready-made. The railroad was looking for a developer who was politically connected.
I knew that right away that he didn't fit the standard mold, and that all the people who would have to pass on this, all of them, right up the line, would be troubled if I put it bluntly, who the hell is Donald Trump? And why are we contracting what could be $100 million worth of real estate with this unknown young man?
The 28-year-old Trump would solve the problem brilliantly, as he would in the years ahead. No money down, juggle the facts when necessary, and use your political connections. He took Eichler to meet then-Mayor Abraham Beame.
The mayor put his arm around, after I took a few minutes to tell the mayor why I was there, and he put his arm around Donald's father, and he said to me, whatever Mr. Trump wants in this town, he gets.
He had a very good father who knew how to get things done, and he learned a lot from him.
Fred Trump and Abe Beame had been childhood friends, and Beame benefited from large Trump campaign contributions. So did Governor Hugh Carey, who would help Donald Trump again and again. Another close advisor was Trump's lawyer, the notorious Roy Cohn.
Whether he could have done these things without his father's influence or his father's resources, I don't know. I don't think you'd get an ordinary 28-year-old getting options on 3 such magnificent pieces of real estate.
Trump was his father's son. He tried to build federally financed housing on one of the sites. When that failed, he found a new way to get money from the government. With a little help from his friends, Trump got the city's huge new convention center built on his land. I'll give up my $4.4 million brokerage fee, he said, if the city will name the convention center for my father. Everyone thought that was unusually public-spirited, until it was discovered that Trump was only entitled to a fee of less than $600,000. The convention center was named for U.S. Senator Jacob Javits. But the Penn Central also owned the rundown Commodore Hotel right next to Grand Central Station.
I wouldn't have taken the Commodore if you gave it to me. And I didn't know anybody in New York who'd take it if you gave it to me. But one day he looked at me and he said, I'm going to buy the Commodore for $10 million. I'm going to get Jay Pritzker at Hyatt to manage it, turn it into a Hyatt, and I'm going to get Equitable to provide $75 million to rehabilitate it, to the point where it's almost like new construction. I'm going to tear it down to the skeleton and then redo it. And I said, you have really gone crazy.
Trump screamed and shouted.
So really interesting. I find that clip, that whole documentary from '91 is super interesting. I'll touch on this last point and then I'm gonna call it a close for the evening. But if you look at the Penn Central Transportation Company, it's really intriguing and interesting. I don't think there's any way to really prove this, but it's just a working theory. So the merged corporations and companies that connect are the Penn Central Railroad Station, New York Central System, and I'm not really sure the name of this one. But if you look through the old days in essentially Germany and Rome, the Roman Empire, Europe, the way that they distributed land and the way that they divvied up land was through railroads. So, and actually a lot of the 14th Amendment corruptions and crimes center around railroads. So who knows? I know when we did a little bit of a dig on that. He said, what was the video address? I'll pull that up. But let's see. So I'll link the documentary in just a second here. But it's crazy because one of the services is the Keystone service. And it kind of reminded me too that the Amtrak, the symbol for Amtrak kind of reminded me a little bit of those three symbols from the ballots and for the elections. But digging a little or reaching a little bit there. But at the end of the day, these companies and corporations, if no one else is holding those trade names or corporations/companies, and Trump finds unique ways to buy it, there's a lot of things that tie to it. And so the Pennsylvania Railroad actually runs right through the White House property. So who knows? Could be. Definitely something to dig deeper into. But yeah, just something I wanted to bring up and show everybody. So that, and then it just connects, around the entire U.S. So let's see what it says. Exactly, Keystone, right? Actually, too, Building 7 is in the shape of a keystone, which is also pretty interesting. But anything else? Let's see if I have any more interesting stuff. Let's see. Yeah, I would say, honestly, connecting these dots is going to be vital. And looking into what we have, another big tell, I think, will be the OIG reports, because you guys got to remember, right? Just because they haven't been technically caught yet, doesn't mean that there's not boatloads of evidence. And so nobody got arrested through those IG reports, but that's more than likely because they're corporations, and they can't really go after themselves. But when you look at all the information that's there for those OIG reports, and I'll just pull a couple, not going to pull them up because they're boring as shit, but I'm going to see if I can bring up the Amorphous Archives, because inside of the Amorphous Archives are all the OIG reports, every single one. So if I bring that up, just a second here. Here we go. So if you go into, I think it is storm. No, not the storm. My bad. I know it is a storm. No, it isn't. It is. Repositories. But there's all the 2018 IG reports. So there's a lot of information when you look at all these. There's audits, there's findings of misconduct, there's procedural reform recommendations, reviews. I mean, if you just look at all the audits, like the number of them is insane. But this one is of the DEA asset forfeiture program, and that's like 80 pages. You got this one. I mean, there's so all of this, although they haven't been quote unquote caught or had anything really actually take place, we have tons of evidence, you know, and it's all right here. Like, this is an audit report that's publicly available for everybody to use this information and potentially go after these people. But yeah, that's just another direction to lead people into. I hope this has been beneficial and exciting, and gonna definitely be doing more and more of these as time passes. But if anyone has any more questions, I'll take a few more, and then I'm gonna head out for the evening. Of course, and appreciate everybody's support, obviously. Definitely going to try to be out there more and be connecting more dots and helping people out as much as possible. Now in federal court record without this case, exactly. So there's two quick tie-ins with that. Obviously, the 14th Amendment being unconstitutional, the original Titles and Nobility Act, the original 13th Amendment. There is a really interesting clip that I will play in a couple episodes, probably tomorrow or the day after. But it's basically just showing all the evidence of what's been going on. And yeah, Brother McElroy, other contact info. I think, let me pull up this Telegram chat. I think I've given my information out to quite a few people, but let me get you the Telegram group that we have here. Let's see. There we go. And other than that, all right, I'm gonna head out for the evening. So I'll be in the chat after, and I'll link the videos and the Telegram links and all that. So I appreciate everybody. Have a wonderful night, and God bless.